Hey, what's happening DC Gunn viewers? It's me, the DC Gunn 1, and welcome to the video. I wanted to wait a little bit before doing a review of James Gunn's Superman so that I could freely talk about the movie without having to worry about spoilers. And I also just wanted to sit with my thoughts and process them instead of just presenting my initial reaction to the movie. And do I have a lot of thoughts? Overall, I thought Superman was great, and I really enjoyed it. In fact, after seeing the movie on opening day, I walked out of the theater already wanting to go back and see it again, which is something that doesn't happen a lot for me with movies. Does it have its flaws? Of course it does. Plenty of them. And that includes flaws as a movie and flaws as a Superman adaptation. But at the end of the day, if this is a sign for the direction that the DCU is going, then I'm very optimistic for the future of DC movies. James Gunn's Superman is very much, and unapologetically, a comic book movie. And that includes everything that comes with being a comic book movie. It's big, it's colorful, it's over the top, and yes, it's a little silly, but most importantly, it's meant to be fun. After nearly 2 decades of comic book movies becoming progressively darker and more mature, Superman feels like a return to the cartoony fun of the comics that the character originated from. While it's not going to break any new ground or push the boundaries of comic book movies, it's not trying to. Its goal was to be an enjoyable experience and make the audience happy. But even though it's a much more lighthearted depiction compared to previous Superman films, it still has its dramatic moments and a real feeling of sincerity to it. The movie never takes itself too seriously, but it also never goes so far in the opposite direction that the darker and more emotional scenes don't work. The cast all do a great job at portraying their respective characters, and they all have a great chemistry between them that comes through in the movie. And it's obvious from the interviews and press tour that they all truly understand their characters like true fans. Each character gets their moment to shine at least once during the movie, allowing the audience to fall in love with both the actor and the character. Mr. Terrific is probably the best example of this, because literally as I was walking out of the theater right after seeing the movie for the first time, I predicted that Mr. Terrific was going to become the fan favorite character of the movie. And after seeing the reception to the character from both audiences and the studio, including rumors of a Mr. Terrific spin-off show, I think it's safe to say that I absolutely called it. James Gunn must just have a weirdly specific talent for making general audiences fall in love with really obscure comic book characters, which is good news for fans of a certain fedora-wearing detective like myself. Nathan Fillion is amazing as Guy Gardner, and nails the jerk-that-you-love-to-watch aspect of the character, and it'll be great to see more of him in both Lanterns and Peacemaker. Anthony Kerrigan as Metamorpho does a great job at capturing the humanity of what is admittedly an odd and kind of goofy-looking character, and makes you feel for him and what he's going through very quickly. Isabella Merced did a great job at playing a younger and more angsty hawkgirl that never goes so far into the angsty teenager trope that she becomes annoying, and is one of the few characters who I actually think got shorted in the movie and hope she gets a more prominent role in future projects. Rachel Brosnahan's Lois Lane feels like a great callback to the Lois Lane of the animated series. The no-nonsense reporter who doesn't take crap from anyone, even if it does get her into trouble, but at the same time has the maturity and compassion to act as a support system for Superman when he needs it, without being relegated to a one-note love interest who's in complete awe of Superman. She'll push back, and put him and the other heroes in their place, and you as the viewer buy it because she has the kind of personality that makes you believe that superpowered beings would treat her as an equal. But the movie also never makes her out to be a saint who can do no wrong, and while she has a much more active role in this film compared to previous Lois Lanes, the movie makes it clear that she's very out of her depth when it comes to helping Superman and the Justice Gang. So instead, she helps take down Luthor by just simply doing what she does best, and that's reporting. As great as a lot of the characters were, the one that stands out the most to me is Nicholas Holt's Lex Luthor. This film's version of Lex Luthor might be the most, for lack of a better term, comically evil version of Lex Luthor ever depicted in a movie. Everything about him just screams supervillain. Not a corrupt billionaire, not a shady businessman, supervillain. The cheesy menacing music, the obnoxiously obvious evil headquarters, the multiple henchmen and army of minions, you just look at him and you know that he's evil. But at the same time, the film went the extra mile to not just have Lex be evil for the sake of being evil. They gave him a reason for why he does the things he does that allows him to justify his actions, at least to himself. Like all truly great villains, this version of Lex genuinely believes that he is in the right and he is doing something for the greater good. You may not agree with his reasoning, and whether or not you're supposed to sympathize with him is up to audience interpretation, but you at least understand him. This version of Lex feels like a cunning strategist who is seemingly always one step ahead of everyone else, but you still get the sense that under that calm and calculated demeanor is a deep-rooted hatred and anger that makes him genuinely unsettling. But at the same time has an element of pettiness to him that allows for great comedic moments that don't feel out of character. And the fact that Holt has to act opposite of the man who beat him out for the role of Superman is such a bittersweet example of life imitating art. Because Lex's hatred for Superman stems from Superman getting the attention and praise that Lex has always desired, and just naturally being everything that Lex has always wanted to be. So for Holt to have to look at the person who gets to be the character that he wanted to be, just adds to the dynamic between the characters and adds another layer to the performance. The only major issue that I have with this version of Lex Luthor is what do you do with him now? It feels like the end of the movie puts Lex in a position where he's mostly taken out of play for the following movies. Unlike the animated series version where Superman is very aware that Lex Luthor is a supervillain, but Lex keeps himself distanced from his schemes just enough that Superman can never prove it and get him arrested, this movie ends with Lex getting arrested after being outed as basically a terrorist, and presumably losing everything, including his company and all of his resources. It feels too early for Lex's story to get to this point because now it feels like he's unable to be a constant presence in the series because he doesn't have the means or the ability to be a threat. While there are definitely ways to bring Lex Luthor back in future installments, it'll have to be in a way that's more like the Lex Luthor and Super Friends, as opposed to the Lex Luthor who puts up a facade for the public and is then an evil mastermind behind the scenes. And now we come to the Man of Steel himself, David Cornsweet as Superman. In my last video, I talked about why I think it's impossible to do a perfect portrayal of Superman in a movie. And while I still stand by that there is yet to be a Superman performance that perfectly captures every aspect of the character, David Cornsweet definitely gets a lot more right than wrong. David was able to capture the essence of Superman just through his appearance alone as well as anyone. The same way you can tell that Lex is evil just by looking at him, you can tell that Superman is a good person just by watching him and how he interacts with others. He embodies that wholesome, dorky innocence that doesn't get shown enough in many adaptations. I really like that the movie has Superman go out of his way to not swear, and goes back to the old school wholesome Boy Scout version of the character that many recent depictions have moved away from. This is a Superman who just wants to help people, and cares about everyone and everything, from a small squirrel to a giant alien and everything in between, and is always looking for the good in people, including giving the bad guys a chance to make things right. But also recognizes when the situation requires him to act, and doesn't hesitate to throw down when the circumstances call for it. He never looks down on anyone or presents himself as being anything more than just an ordinary guy, which makes him come across as a much friendlier and approachable version of the character, much like the Christopher Reeve version. Many people praise David's portrayal for showing audiences that it's actually cool to be nice, and that showing compassion and vulnerability takes as much strength as taking action. But I think the trait that most defines this version of Superman that people are going to latch onto is his humanity. He's Clark Kent first and Superman second. Underneath the suit and the powers is just a regular guy who goes through the same things that everyone else does. He has a job, he has a family, he has friends. Basically, his whole monologue at the end sums up who this version of Superman is. Birth planet aside, he is human. And part of that includes making mistakes as a result of bad judgment or getting emotional, which you can argue over if that should be a part of Superman's character, but you can't deny that it makes for a more interesting character. It's hard to relate to a character who's presented as not having any flaws, because it's difficult for us as viewers to connect to a character who is portrayed as being virtually perfect, as we as humans are inherently flawed, and it also just makes the character less interesting as a whole. So Gunn made sure to show that this version of Superman was flawed and went through hardships, so that the audience could see themselves in Superman, which as an audience member is an amazing feeling to experience, and is the foundation of creating a hero that people look up to. Besides the ending speech, I think the scene that captures the human side of this Superman the best is when Lois is looking around Clark's room and sees a poster for the Mighty Crabjoys. Just the idea of Superman being a fanboy for this silly band and having this secret guilty pleasure makes him relatable in a way that you just immediately connect with, and instantly captures the human part of Superman in a way that not many other things would be able to the same effect. This version is also one of the best when it comes to selling the idea that Clark Kent and Superman are two completely different people. The best portrayals of Clark Kent understand that the disguise is not just the glasses and the hair, it's the whole presentation. The body language, the mannerisms, the voice, they all change between the two identities. When you compare the scene of Superman wiping the floor with an army of raptors to the scene of Clark doing a little dance with Jimmy Olsen in the Daily Planet, it feels like two completely different people, which is how Superman and Clark Kent are supposed to be portrayed. But most importantly, this Superman just makes you feel happy, and embodies that positivity that Superman is supposed to represent. Now, while I really like what the movie did with a lot of the characters for the most part, there were a few choices that I have mixed feelings about. The main one is the change made to Superman's parents, and their reason for sending Kal-El to Earth, which I think is one of the choices that got the most backlash. When I first saw the movie, I initially really didn't like the change because of how it kind of vilified Superman's parents. As someone who is used to the Marlon Brando and Russell Crowe versions of Jor-El, and even the animated series version for what little we saw of him, who was pretty much outcasted because he was the only Kryptonian who wasn't blinded by pride to see the faults and arrogance of the Kryptonian people, and just wanted the best life for his son, to see that character portrayed as a near egomaniacal figure that looks down at humans as weaklings, and expects his son to repopulate the species and rule the planet as a ruthless dictator, just felt wrong. And I understand why they decided to make this change. It goes back to the nurture over nature aspect of Superman's character that has been around for a long time. And by making it that Kal-El was meant to take over and rule the world with an iron fist, it makes his choice to instead be a loving protector that much more impactful, because of how much it goes against what he was quote-unquote meant to be. Because it shows that Superman is his own person, who isn't defined by where he came from, but is instead defined by his actions. Or to quote Pa Kent, his choices is what makes him who he is. But I still don't think you needed to make that change to get that point across. Many previous iterations have been able to show the balance in Superman's pride and love for his Kryptonian heritage, while also making it clear that his upbringing with the Kents is what shaped who he is. But to be fair, what came as a result of this choice might have made it worth it. The conversation between Clark and Jonathan Kent is probably going to go on to be recognized as one of the most emotional Superman scenes of all time, and that ending of Superman watching family videos might be the sweetest and most wholesome ending to a superhero movie. And if they use this as an in-world explanation for Superman changing his emblem from the Kryptonian symbol to a more traditional S for the next film, that just might be the justification that helps soften the backlash. Another thing to remember is that this isn't the first time that this has been done with Jor-El or the Kryptonians in general, and actually has its roots in the comics. So it's not like James Gunn just made this up out of nowhere to be a shocking twist for the movie. He's pulling directly from the comics and previous adaptations. I think people, myself included, are just so used to Jor-El being a benevolent mentor figure for Superman. So for him and Lara to share the mindset of the other Kryptonians of being superior beings will always just feel a little weird regardless of the medium. Speaking of that last scene, that should have been the post-credit scene. Of all the cameos and big reveals throughout the movie, Supergirl stumbling into the fortress was the one that got the biggest reaction from the audience when I saw the movie in the theater. That's how you tease the next movie in a way that still feels like it fits with the movie it appears in, and in my opinion, would have been a much better post-credit scene than the one we actually got. Now, while I'm sure that there's a deeper meaning to the post-credit scene that I either missed or will become clear later on, like some of the ideas that I've seen floating around is that Ultraman will return as Bizarro, or this will eventually lead to a Crisis on Infinite Earths or some other kind of multiverse story. You could have just worked that scene into the actual movie. Just have it lead into Superman walking off with Lois. Of course the final scene would have to be changed to accommodate, but it still would have worked just as well. You still end the movie with Superman healing while watching his old home movies, and then the post-credit scene begins with Superman hanging out in the fortress, Supergirl stumbles in and leaves with Krypto, and the scene ends with Superman and Ford talking about how they're concerned about Supergirl's partying. It teases the Supergirl movie, and doesn't feel as tacked on as the actual post-credit scene does. There were also just some weird choices made with the movie. I'm not crazy about Superman using hypno glasses as part of his disguise being canon. Even if it comes from the comics, it feels like an unneeded explanation as David's performance does enough to convince you that Clark and Superman are different enough that no one would make a connection between the two. And then there's John Cena's cameo as Peacemaker, which just opens up a whole can of worms about reusing actors and versions of the characters from the DCEU that seemingly doesn't have any satisfying answers and just creates more confusion. But even with its faults and the few personal gripes that I have with the movie, I still think Superman is amazing. It's a great modernized portrayal that still captures the spirit of the original comics, and has an amazing cast and team behind it that truly understand the characters. A lot of people are talking about how the movie gave them a sense of hope, which in an era where all forms of media have become increasingly cynical, is something that people needed. But for me, in addition to giving people hope, the movie just made people happy, which is what Superman is all about. And I think that's the highest praise that you could give to any film about the Man of Steel. But let me know what you think. Leave your thoughts in the comments below about what you thought of James Gunn's Superman, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos.